Hey, Prince Magnum. In order to make Project Spirit a daily driver like she was before, and to be able to do the run that you had to put on hold, what is it going to take? What are you going to have to do to Project Spirit? Well, stick around and we're going to actually talk about that right about. Hello once again, and welcome to the Prince Magnum channel, where hot rodding and romance do coexist. I'm your host, Prince Magnum. Welcome to Do-It-Yourself Budget Hot Rodding, and in this episode, we're going to talk about what it's going to take for Project Spirit to be back to her old self, and at the same time, what it's going to take for her to be able to do that run that we had to put on hold that we were supposed to do back in August. And when we talk about that run, again, the reason why it had to be put on hold, well, that's a special video all in itself. Now, that being said, when we're talking about Project Spirit, if you've been living under a rock and you don't know who Project Spirit is this car right here. That's right, folks. My 1975 Ford Maverick four-door sedan. Now, Project Spirit still has her original inline six. She has a 3-speed standard transmission, manual to those who don't know what a standard transmission is. Yeah, there was a time in our country when manual transmissions were standard. Anyhow. In order for her to be a daily driver once again, because even though she's legal, she's got some issues. She sat for almost a year. So in order for her to actually get back to being a daily driven car, we have to do some things. What are those things? Well, we have to start with a basic tune-up. Now, if you're getting a used car from a car lot, they're only really going to go through that vehicle enough to make sure that it'll pass inspection for you. So, the things that I'm about to talk about are the same things that you're going to need to do if you buy a used car, or sometimes they like to say a pre-owned car, okay? These are the same exact things that you're going to have to deal with. So, now that we've established that, what goes into a basic general tune-up? Now, when I say a tune-up, I'm talking where you change the plug wires. You change the spark plug wires, so you got the plug wires. If it has a distributor, you need to change the cap and the rotor bug. If you have to change the air filter, you have to change fuel filters. You have to change the oil, and when you do an oil change, you need to change the oil filter. Whenever you need to change the coolant. And you should do a little bit of a flush there. These are all things that you need to do. And if you have an automatic transmission, you need to change the transmission fluid and the transmission filter. If you have a manual transmission, you should at least check the level of that transmission. And if it's rear wheel drive, you definitely need to check the gear oil in the rear end of your vehicle. This also goes for four-wheel drive trucks as well, because if you don't take care of these vehicles, if you don't check these things over, they wear out very quickly, and they'll leave you stranded. So the last thing that you want to do is leave yourself stranded. So everything that I have just discussed here it goes into a basic general tune-up, the same exact things that you're going to have to actually do, whether it's a newer vehicle you're buying from a used car lot, or an old classic like Project Spirit. So let's begin with the first thing that we picked up from our friends over at the Deloge AutoZone. Uh, the first thing that we have on the list is obviously a fuel filter. Now, for those that do not are familiar with Project Spirit has two fuel filters. One of them is from the factory. The other one isn't. The first one, basically, when you start Project Spirit up, the gas comes from the gas tank up to the fuel pump, which is mounted to the engine. The fuel pump then pushes it up through a fuel filter that looks like this to another, through the gas line up to another fuel filter that's mounted to the carburetor. Now, this design is a great improvement over the stock setup because the fuel filter that's mounted to the carburetor can be a little difficult to take off and put back on, especially put back on, because if the threads just don't quite match up, it's a little bit of a pain in the neck. So to avoid having to deal with the one on the carburetor constantly getting gunked up, we have the one long before it gets to that carburetor. And basically, these are about $5-6 at your local AutoZone, depending on where you live. The prices will vary, but where I live, it's about $5-6 before tax. And the fuel basically goes in right through this spout right here, comes out, and it's a lot cleaner than it was before it got to this fuel filter. Modern day gasoline is very dirty, it's very nasty. It just wreaks havoc on engines if you don't have proper filtration for it. So whenever you buy one of these kits from your local AutoZone, it obviously comes with the fuel filter, but it comes with other hardware stuff, basically like some rubber lines that will allow you to connect into the hard line, and of course these little squeeze-on clamps to hold everything into place. This is just kind of what you get in these kits. Now we especially don't use these. I don't like these because sometimes trying to fight to get some pliers or some channel locks onto these, sometimes it's just a pain in the neck. And even though I'm not going to be replacing anything like this, it doesn't hurt to have it on hand in case you have to change anything like that. So it's always smart to have spare parts. And I've probably got 1 million of these laying around. But eventually we will be looking at where we'll be taking out the rubber lines and replacing them with silicone, if at all possible. And you can get those parts through jigs. All right. And the other thing that we picked up is just your basic run-of-the-mill air filter that a lot of the cars back in the day used to use. There was once a time when pretty much all American cars pretty well used, for the most part, the same air filter. And this just drops right in to her original stock air filter assembly. Now, despite all the changes that we've made, opening up that air filter assembly, basically air will pass through, goes right down into the carburetor, very squeaky clean. Now, if you try to run a vehicle without an air filter, you could actually mess up the valves in your engine. So it's very crucial that you keep an air filter in. So basically, don't try, if you've got a clogged air filter, just replace it. They're usually no more, in the worst case scenario, they're no more than maybe $15-20. And to me, replacing one of these every 6 months and paying only, this one only cost me $11, but paying $11 every few months as opposed to replacing an entire engine just makes sense. Along with that, I will also tell you that running a clogged air filter is just as bad as not running one at all, because despite the fact that it does an amazing job at cleaning this out, if you don't keep these replaced, nasty stuff can still squeak through here. Along with that, if your engine can't breathe, you're not getting the best gas mileage. In order for proper combustion, you have to have enough oxygen to create proper combustion. So if you have a system in your in your engine that burns, the average, basically all engines today, even modern engines, the same as they were back in the 1960s, they only burn 40% of the gasoline that goes in. If you're not if you're not keeping up with your air filter, in some cases I've heard of them, getting, only burning 30%. So if your catalytic converters are not what they once were, you'll have that horrible gas smell just like an old car. So that's something to bear in mind. This is a cheap investment. If you're like, but I will also say, if you've got an air filter assembly like Project Spirit, you should do this every 3 months. And if you have one of the cold air intakes, like for a modern car, and I'm not talking about one of the aftermarket ones, I'm talking about the ones that go up and connect into the fender of your vehicle, change it every 3 months. Anyways, even if the factory says you can get away with it for X amount, don't buy into that, folks. That's where they start ripping you off. Okay, because even though you've got an onboard ECU that monitors everything, including whether or not you pass gas inside the vehicle, the truth of it is that it's going to monitor it to a certain degree. And the other truth of that also is that most people don't realize that every 3 months you should be taking a scan tool to your ECU, plugging it into your OBD2 connector and running a scan whether or not it needs it, because the computers in even modern vehicles can only keep track of 90 days worth of information. So do yourself a favor, invest in a cheap $20 scan tool so you can check and see if there's any codes. Most of the time, any codes that you find are going to be relatively, it's just going to be, it won't mean anything. And clearing off your computer of those codes and resetting it every 3 months, it's preventative maintenance, just like you would be doing at home to a home computer, doing a defrag at least once a week. So, these are just things that you should know, even if your project vehicle is a modern day vehicle. So now that you know that, basically what we're going to do here in this next part of the video is we're actually going to be installing these parts, and I'm going to show you how relatively easy it is to do stuff like this on a classic car. So stick around as we dive into that.
Alright, first stop on getting Project Spirit back up to snuff, we have to go ahead and change out her air filter. That's her air filter assembly, and it's literally held onto her carburetor by a wing nut. Along with that, we're going to change out the fuel filter, as I admit, all the things that I mentioned before in the previous part of the video. So it's ridiculously easy to change out an air filter on these old cars. Now on new cars it's still pretty dang easy, but on the older ones it was even easier. Literally, you take the lid off and that's it. That's the old one, pretty nasty looking. And then there's the new one, bright and shiny, if you will. We're going to slap that in there, put the air filter assembly back on. That has changed. We do not have to worry about that for another 3 months of driving. So the next stop will be to change out the fuel filter. The fuel filter is probably clogged beyond belief. As a matter of fact, in the video, you might be able to see how nasty the gas was that was inside of there. There was a lot of rust, a lot of sediment. As soon as I took it off there, I mean, it was nothing but filth just pouring out of that thing. So we want to get that off. We want to get a brand new one on there, so Project Spirit's getting brand new, pretty much good, clean gasoline into her carburetor, and of course that'll be down in her engine. Remember, folks, getting grit inside of your combustion chamber is a bad thing. It'll chew up the cylinders. It'll make these cars run funny, and most of the time, if you do have a lot of fuel filters, going into the engine, if you will, going up to that carburetor, they're going to get clogged really, the first one's going to get clogged easy, the next one's going to, however it works, but that first one's always going to be nasty and filthy and dirty and all that other stuff, and that's all just because gasoline today is very, very dirty. Okay, so literally to change Project Spirit's fuel filter, it's literally just 2 screws that are on these clamps. So I'll undo one screw, remove the clamp, undo another screw, and remove that clamp, and that fuel filter comes out. That's how easy it is to change on Project Spirit. So again, these old cars are really easy to work on. That's why a lot of us old timers are like, no, the old cars were better because they were easy to work on. So that's why that is the case. So did this solve the issue with Project Spirit? I wish it did. What ended up happening is once I got everything together, got her started up, drove her around the block a couple of times, she fell flat on her face again. So now we have a different issue. This was a cheap issue to take a look at. It was a cheap and easy one to fix. And it was the place that I wanted to start with because I knew if we took her around the block, took a look at everything, and she still did what she was doing, I knew full well that there was another issue. I'm leaning now towards the fact that it's probably a neutral safety switch left over from her days when she was a 3 on the tree, and she's had some ignition issues. If you remember in previous videos, we're talking, long before this, I've talked about the fact that when I go to shut Project Spirit off, there's a rod that goes down to her ignition box that doesn't quite, disconnect the ignition like it's supposed to. So even though she's off, and even though there's no lights on, she's still draining from her battery. So you have to give that a bump, and if she decides that bump isn't enough, she'll still drain the battery. So the next thing that we have done pretty much for a long time is we've disconnected that battery. Well, I'm tired of disconnecting the battery. So the next step from here is no, we're not going to go inside the steering column just yet and start taking a lot of this stuff out. But what we are going to do is we're going to move that stuff off of the steering column. We're going to look at disconnecting the neutral safety switch and moving her ignition to a control panel of some sort that will allow me to basically, turn her to the on position, and with the flick of a switch, then the starter will engage. Once I release that switch, then the starter will disengage, and by then, hopefully, she's running. So we're going to move all of that off. This is kind of an old design that a lot of us old hot rodders have used a million times over, and this will be no different. Again, we're doing that retro stuff that you would have seen back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, into the 80s, well into the 90s where I live. And what this does is it kind of function, and it'll function kind of as an anti-theft device. So pretty neat deal. That's what we're actually looking at doing next on Project Spirit. Alright, another one to the books. Project Spirit does run better, but she's not fixed yet. Hopefully before too much longer we'll have these bugs worked out and I can get back to driving her every day. Alright, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon. And if you would like some wonderful people that support the Prince Magnum channel and you want to check them out and support them too, be sure to check out these fine following folks. These are hard-working members within the Maverick Nation, and they continue to push me every time you turn around to continue to provide content like this and to show you all what the classics have to offer. Also, as usual, get out there and work on a project. I don't care what it is. Just do something with yourself. Remember, idle hands and a creative mind go together like oil and water. If you have a sweetheart, sweep them off their feet and do something special for them today. And as always, for all of you out there, if no one out there has told you that they love you today, Prince Magnum does. God bless you and have a happy 24.